Okay, so because my nephew was getting married at the beginning of June this year, and I discovered that the ICOM conference, the triennial conference, was actually in Belfast the week after. It was just a great opportunity for me to actually get back to my first UK conference in 30 years or more. It's as I said, it was my first time in 38 years. The first time I went to Belfast was in 1981 for my first attempt at getting a job after I finished the course in Durham. And it was a very different city then, and I'm pleased to say it's come a long way since then. In those days it was best known for, and still is, for the maiden voyage of a ship it built sinking, namely the Titanic, which is now its biggest tourist attraction. And also for the troubles in 1981. It was a very troubled place, and I went on a tour around the murals in the Loyalist and Republican areas in Belfast, which was very interesting. We had a very good guide giving us a lot of background information, and it's very interesting to see how it's developed since then, but it's a very safe place now. And it's better known for Game of Thrones. Northern Ireland is actually in a tourist boom because Game of Thrones, not quite a lot of scenes were filmed there. So that's been very positive. And it has a beautiful new conference centre right on the river in the middle of town, which is, you can see top right. And the conference, I discovered, was packed into 2 days, plus a day for the field trips. And it would have been great to have been 3 days. I thought it was 3 days because it was advertised as being up till the Saturday, and I discovered there was nothing happening on Saturday, so I took the train up to the Giant's Causeway on the north coast, because they cover a lot of material. There's plenary sessions at the start and at the final session, but the rest of the time there's 7 concurrent sessions going on, so I couldn't possibly see more than a fraction of what was on. You can see, I've got a copy of the programme with all the abstracts, if anyone wants to have a look at it, and also that web link, you've actually got all the abstracts are available, which is great. So you'll be seeing a few things about what I actually managed to get to, and so it's rather a personal tour of the conference. The couple of big projects were talked about in the plenary sessions. One was conservation of the Mary Rose, which was the flagship of Henry VIII, which sank in the Solent, and it was raised, or half of the wreck was raised in the 1980s, and it's been under conservation ever since then, in a large hall using polyethylene glycol. Interestingly, a couple of points came out of that which I found quite interesting. One was the iron compounds, which are still creating a problem within the waterlogged wood. They're using nano compounds now, which apparently lock on to the iron, but then are magnetic. And I actually have to go back and see the full paper to actually understand this process, but they can draw the pollutants, the iron compounds, out using those nanoparticles because of the ability to use magnetic fields, which I thought was pretty interesting. And there's quite a few mention of nano compounds at the conference, which shows that's an area developing fast. They also talked about problems of freeze drying a huge part of the steering gear of the ship, and they had to debate as to whether to chop it in half to get it into a freeze dryer and do it in 2 halves and put it back together again afterwards. They opted not to. They opted to put it into the main hull and treat it with the thing. They regretted it in the end because it was such a very difficult item to handle. And I know in National Museum of Scotland actually did have that dilemma a few years ago, and actually did cut a Bronze Age canoe in half and freeze dry the 2 halves and then put it back together again, feeling it was the most satisfactory, painful but satisfactory method. Also a couple of points about the air conditioning. I'll just mention, after I mentioned this SS Great Britain, this huge early iron ship designed by Brunel, which was retrieved and taken back to Bristol, and it's now being conserved in a dry dock As you can see, the lower half of the it's got this fake water, so it means that you're under this roof. The lower half of the hull, which is the most unstable part, is full of salts. They try to keep that at 20% humidity, whereas the rest of the ship is being conserved in normal type of environment, and that has all the furnishings have been put back in. So engineers look after the bottom half of the ship, and conservators look after the top half of the ship, which was an interesting dilemma. But what was really interesting with both these talks, they mentioned the fact that they found that the codes, the computer code for the air conditioning systems, when someone was asked to come in and optimize them, said, this is really just office-based coding software for the air conditioning system, yet you're wanting very specialized conditions. Humidity is the most important thing. Mary Rose was at a set point of 19 degrees. They said, you're not really worried too much about the temperature. If it moves between 18 and 20, you'll be quite happy rather than constantly hunting for 19 degrees. So I'd like to follow that up with these authors to see actually what they got out of it, because it sounded like they were going to get somebody to rewrite software so that it was really designed for conservation type purposes, because at the moment, probably a lot of institutions have got very specific conditions they're chasing, and software is not the most efficient way of doing it. It needs to be more carefully written so that it's for that type of purpose, for a humidity specific or for an unusual temperature. The Heritage Science section was quite interesting. The ethical sampling protocols we put together by their science group, the ICON science group, and it I won't be able to read this, but just to show you that there is a flow chart and all the different people involved, researchers, owners and custodians, the researcher, the back custodians. It's we've got a very much process to ensure that people don't rush into sampling objects without considering all the different factors that should be considered before we do anything that you may regret in the future. The other recording, cataloguing of samples, this is a paper that was given by somebody who works at the Library of Congress, and they were trying to bring together all of the sampling and the data, the imaging about objects, which is distributed over the years and put it into a database. Nowadays we are tending to do that with the data collection databases, but there's still a lot of material that is outliers. It's in somebody's bottom drawer, or it's in a library somewhere, and this is a big project to try and extract from people all this information, and so it was considered as a whole, and you've got a whole history of the object, which was sounds a bit dull, but it's quite important if you can actually get it right. The collaboration between universities and regional museums, that was quite an interesting paper, because the guy from Nottingham University was saying that there's a lot of incentive now for research money to be given to universities to go out and do a project. They descend on a regional museum, they do work on an object. The curator often feels sort of left out of it, that the collection is simply there as a tool for someone's research outputs, and you don't build a collaboration where they feel they're getting something out of it. And so trying to make it an equal, so it's really important to build a relationship which ensures that both people are getting an outcome. And he talked about how the information can be put into an interesting video. You can use the 3D modelling, results of analysis, and give a product to the museum that they can feel, well, this has really enhanced our collection for the public. And apparently the way it's happening when they serve big museums, a lot of times small museums felt they've been used basically for someone's research to achieve their research in order to get their PhD, to get it published. Pest control, the British Museum in the middle of moving their oceanic and African collections, a huge job moving them into the main British Museum building. They described this CO2 treatment they're using now, which is basically the old CO2 bubble, but they've used a room-sized bag, and they're flushing CO2 in at one end, drawing the air out the other end, monitoring it. I thought it was their point that they abandoned nitrogen flushing to use CO2 because it was faster because of the output they wanted, but it sounded like they had actually took long. When I checked the graphs again, it was taking about a month for the entire cycle anyway to do it. So I think it's more because they were having trouble getting the levels of nitrogen, and they getting right down to 0.3% oxygen. So CO2, you can use a much lower level of CO2 content, which is going to kill. But it also has a lot of safety issues.
Yeah.
So they need lots and lots of monitoring around the chamber to make sure you're not leaking so much CO2 into the room that you actually want to asphyxiate your staff standing close by. Ipswich Museum used a thermal treatment for an entire store, which was quite unusual because they felt it was going to be too big a job to empty the store, treat everything, and treat the building. They used a company to actually heat treat the collection, but they had to sort out all the material that would be vulnerable to heat treatment beforehand and take it out and treat that separately. And said even with all the preparation, in hindsight, to be terribly honest, that they had a few mistakes, like there's a resin actually exuding out of wood that was very resin-rich wood. And they missed these wax models that were in a box, and that's what remained of the objects. They just ran out of the box. So it really, to raise the thing up to 55 degrees, you do need to be very careful what you've actually left in that area. So it's a very interesting and honest presentation. The environmentally solvent, this was interesting. I don't know has anyone actually heard of Vertrel? Because it's the first time I'd heard of it. It's a substitute that they've tried out. Getty have been doing a lot of experiments on it. And I saw a poster and 2 references in different papers to this. And you can use it instead of acetone as a solvent for B72. It has a number of virtues, but its environmental credentials are what they're most interested in. The fact that it's recycled, low toxicity, laws on heating potential, inert. It's tested the adhesives seem to work well. It's a B72 solvent. Produces superior thin films, varnishes, which might interest paintings conservators. And it may be a new substitute. It's a question of someone getting into the country, but it shouldn't be too difficult to import if it's non-flammable, which is nice.
What else is it used for? So maybe it's here and we just don't know about.
Could we keep up with
Yeah, I don't know. But I actually don't know. It must be developed for other industrial uses. Ron Ormsby, who's someone you may know from the Australian Conservator, who's worked at the Tate Gallery for years, she gave one of the plenary session talks, and it was really dense. There's a lot of material in there, so I can only give you my impressions of it. A couple of good things came out of it. But for paintings and conservators, I've got many paintings conservators here tonight. No. Yes. There's a couple. It's done all this work at the Tate and in collaboration with other international organisations and cleaning methods for modern paintings, and they found that they worked through the flow chart of different methods and what works and what doesn't work. But they've always found it very difficult to clean acrylic paintings. But basically the outcome was that they found this gel called PEGI 6, polyvinyl alcohol-based gel, which you can buy it in sheets, and you can cut up little bits of it and put it on the surface. Now, again, some of you might have come across this before. I hadn't actually seen it. So rather than having to make up your own gels and apply them, you simply apply the sheets, and they've had very good results. I think it was a Liechtenstein painting that they used it on, and got the best results out of all the trial cleaning methods they used. So it's certainly something I think I'd like to know more about. This is a very fiddly little treatment, which I was quite impressed by. It seemed quite extreme that all these bottles of samples of water and medicines that were going into this welcome collection at the Science Museum were put on display. In order to display them, they're worried about the light exposure of these old paper labels. So what they did was create a facsimile that looked incredibly like the real thing, but it was slightly larger than the original. And then they put in a melanite barrier layer between the facsimile and the label, and then this tiny little layer of adhesive around the border, and then put it over the label, so you just thought you were looking at the original, which there's lots and lots of them, so it would be an incredibly fiddly job, but I was very full of admiration for the fact that they managed to do it. This was a good treatment, which quite interested me, because there is one at the Australian Museum of these ancestral effigies, which actually contains an over-modelled skull at the Australian Museum. And this was being treated at the Pitt Rivers Museum in Cambridge to go on display. Some of the materials that this conservator, the private conservator, was using were of interest to me. I had a chat to her later. Variform is something that's used partly in the special effects industry, in theatrical applications, and you can heat it or you can dampen it and then mold it into a support. And she only used it as a temporary support inside some of the arms, but then used rare earth magnets to hold them in. I know that's been done before, and in fact Megan did quite a bit of work on that, didn't you, way back? And this was actually for a long term, that was going to stay in the object to help hold some of the bits together. Yeah, she also used something called Frankenstein twists, which I've never heard of. Has anyone else heard of Frankenstein twists? It's part of this Japanese tissue twisted up into a little thing and then bent over, and then use it as part of your filling process. It seems it's a term they use in the UK now. You use that along with starch-based or similar adhesive for filling in gaps in an object like this. It's of low strength. Another material that she used, which is going to stay inside the object as a longer term support, is false shape, which is a white pliable felt, and it's actually so it's a non-woven fabric. It can be heated up. It's a synthetic polyester, and it locks itself into shape. You just heat it quite gently. Apparently, I guess someone's tested it for its long-term stability, and I think it's going to be used in the future, because they say, I was being told that it's being used for supports for objects, for display supports, because of its ability to mould and hold a shape. Trends and use of collections. I had quite a chat with Pia Edqvist from the University of Oslo, because she's given quite an impassioned talk about people changing a language in ethnographic collections, which again is a term we don't use anymore, and said it was quite hard to make people break their habits, and there was latitude to human remains as well in collections. Again, it's not so relevant to us. I think Australia is streets ahead of the Europeans in this area, are much more sensitive to the way you use language. Conference in.
Can you wrap that up now?
Sorry?
Can you wrap
Wrap it up? Yeah. She was talking again about overuse of collections and making them accessible and using them today and not be too precious. And then there was a very personal talk about diversity in the conservation profession by a textile conservator who actually talked about how her background had held her back, and she was really asking for greater acceptance and less. I think she said, and perhaps it's more the case in Europe, that there's a certain mould you have to fit into, and people with different voices are not heard. So in summary, yeah, new materials and nanocompounds, sustainably green products was a theme that came right through, and supporting emerging conservatories was mentioned several times. Collaboration, and the fact that we should be storytellers and not gatekeepers. Thank you.
Thank you.